Good morning, remote learners and other students interested in progressivism. Um, let's get started by talking about what progressivism is. Today's lesson is going to be on the accomplishments of these early progressives. So let's just sort of review progressivism here, right? It's an umbrella. An umbrella label for a lot of different economic, political, social, and moral reforms. Uh, the progressive era is all about changing and reforming American society. Now, under this umbrella of progressivism, you've got the muckrakers. Remember Upton Sinclair, Lincoln Steffens. Um, you've got Upton Sinclair, Lincoln Steffens. You've got Jacob Riis. Um, right? They're investigative journalists exposing problems, the muck or the dirt in American society. You've got the suffragists who are wanting women to be able to vote. The temperance movement, they aimed to ban alcohol. That was side by side with the social gospel movement. Improvements for public health fall under progressivism. Um, Trying to correct political corruption on the state, federal, and local levels of government. Labor unions fall under the progressive movements, and even some civil rights fall under progressivism. So, progressivism is about reform and change. Now, like I said, today we're talking about the accomplishments of some of these early progressives, and we're going to meet some of them. Um, the early progressives, and throughout all of the progressives, the progressives identified political problems and social problems, and they made individual or local efforts to remedy them. Now, the progressives were shaken by the abuses of industrial society, so much that some even made some individual efforts to remedy these, um, or just to cause social reform, efforts to cause social reform. One of these um, is Jane Addams, as you see on the screen. Now, settlement houses were started in these slum neighborhoods by progressives such as Jane Addams. Um, and a settlement house is an all purpose community center for poor people that are living in these crowded urban neighborhoods, these tenements and things. So, settlement houses provided things like childcare, nursing services, English lessons to immigrants. Most of these settlement houses are staffed by volunteers. Like Jane Addams and her volunteers lived at Whole House among the people that they were trying to help. This is a picture of Whole House here. So they lived among um, the people they're trying to help in these slum neighborhoods, in these settlement houses. Um, Another leading voice in the social reform movement here is Ida B. Wells. Now, lynching was one of the main tactics used to terrorize African Americans during this time, especially in the South. Um, Three of Wells's friends, um, they were lynched for crimes they didn't commit. Now, lyn- now Ida B. Wells goes on an anti-lynching crusade, a very national um, anti-lynching campaign, and she does a bunch of research on lynching, and she revealed that 728 African men and women were lynched in the previous decade. Um, so Ida B. Wells goes on this anti-lynching campaign, looking for social change. Um, Other progressives, uh, they formed associations to promote change. One of these is W.E.B. Du Bois. Uh, Du Bois was born in Massachusetts in 1868. Uh, this is right after the Civil War. And he's the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard. Now, when I say that some progressives start associations, Du Bois was one of the founders of the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He was also the editor of its journal, The Crisis. But what the NAACP does is it fights for equality for African Americans. So Du Bois is starting an organization to promote social change here. Now, Booker T. Washington, he's another prominent African American leader, and he argued that African Americans should seek a gradual equality. Now, he says they should focus on job training and not be too demanding. Now, him and W.B. Du Bois could not be further apart in their beliefs. Du Bois disagrees with Booker T. Washington. Du Bois toured the country delivering speeches, and he's in favor of immediate racial equality. So Booker T. Washington, gradual equality, not being too demanding. Du Bois, immediate racial equality. Du Bois supported open protests, and he criticized Booker T. Washington for not being forceful enough in his goals. So they both want racial equality, but their methods of how to achieve this differ, right? So once again, Du Bois wants immediate equality, and he disagrees with Booker T. Washington on how to achieve that, who Booker T. Washington says, let's focus on job training and eventually we'll earn white people's respect. So they disagreed on how to achieve equality. Another association, or it's a voluntary association, was formed during the Progressive era, and it's called the Anti-Defamation League. This is a Jewish organization that was opposed to religious prejudices. Progressives also organized charities, clubs, and other associations like the YMCA and the YWCA. Now, a lot of progressives focus their attention on correcting the abuses found at the municipal level. Now, municipal means city, local city government. They wanted to prevent corruption and make local government more efficient. Progressives wanted to replace the rule of political bosses and political machines with public-minded mayors. So if you look at this chart here, you've got the mayor who controls the city service and the city council. Under this new municipal reform that the progressives are doing in a bunch of different cities, the city council controls a city manager, so they share power, and then the city services are down here at the bottom. So it takes a little bit of power out of that strong mayor who's controlled by political machines and political bosses, and puts more power into the hands of the people at the local level. They also, within municipal reform, they expanded city services. And this is to deal with overcrowding. This is to deal with fire hazards, the lack of public services. A lot of times these municipal governments took direct ownership of utilities, city services like electricity, water, gas. And a lot of the critics called this gas and water socialism because government ownership of industry is one of the tenets of socialism. But they were doing it for a good purpose here, to be able to bring some change to these cities and be able to take care of everybody with all the urbanization and growth headed that way. Now, state governments are no different. There was reform also at the state level, all three levels of government: local, national, and state, which we're about to talk about. So at the state level, you've got progressives like Robert La Follette, and he's out of Wisconsin. And then you've got somebody you've probably heard of, Theodore Roosevelt, who is the governor of New York. And they take steps to free their business from corruption and the influence of big business. These are anti-big government state governor reformer guys. La Follette, he was the guy that challenged political bosses and the influence of the railroad monopoly. And Roosevelt was a big trust buster, anti-monopoly guy. He actually goes after one of J.P. Morgan's railroad conglomerate monopolies. Now, progressives introduced important reforms to many states here, such as the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. The purpose of these three reforms is to end corruption and to make state government more directly accountable to the people. Now, these reforms are going to raise a level of public participation in politics, in the political process here. It gives citizens more of a direct voice in government by bypassing politicians. A lot of these ideas were borrowed from the populists. So here's some of these reforms. The secret ballot, right? That was a populist idea, right? To protect voters from feeling pressured or intimidated to vote a certain way. Now they can vote in secret. This brings more participation to people. The initiative, voters could directly introduce bills in the state legislators, and they could vote on whether they wanted a bill passed. A lot of times they'll put an initiative on a ballot, like whether or not to raise taxes. You've probably seen some signs that say like Proposition 46 or some number. Now that's putting a bill, that's what an initiative is. Voters bypassing a politician and putting a bill directly on a ballot. The referendum, another political reform here, voters could compel legislators to place a bill on a ballot for approval. So if there's enough support for an issue, they could force it onto a ballot whether leaders decided they wanted it on there or not. It puts more power directly in the hands of the people. So does the recall. Elected officials can now be removed from office if voters held a special election. Direct party primaries. Special elections could be determined or could determine whom party leaders wanted to represent them as candidates in the general election. You've got direct election of senators now. This is the 17th Amendment. Senators are elected directly by the people instead of being chosen by the state legislators. That was another populist proposal. Social legislation. States enacted their own laws to overcome some of the worst effects of industrialization here. Urban housing conditions, they made tenements better by forcing landlords to have lighting, to have ventilation, upkeep. They abolished child labor in several states. This is a horrible joke. This is Bob. Bob has no arms. Knock, knock. Who's there? Not Bob. Right? We've kind of talked about this when we use the example of what is going on in factories and the mistreatment of workers. Now, they regulated safety and healthy conditions in factories, limiting the number of hours women could work, forcing employers to give compensation to workers injured on the job. So if Bob is injured in the steel mill and now he can't work, progressives are fighting for him to have compensation. And they also passed laws that protected natural resources and created wildlife preserves. Roosevelt does a lot of that. Let's talk about the spoils system. So throughout much of the 19th century here, corruption has been widespread at the federal as well as state levels in government. Much of this corruption can be traced back to the spoils system. This is where government jobs are held and they're used to reward people who maybe made a political contribution to somebody's campaign or helped in their campaign or supported them by voting. Now, as the government grows larger, there's a need for more qualified people in civil service jobs, right? Government jobs, civil service, government, same. Um, President Garfield is going to be assassinated. And he's assassinated by a disappointed job seeker in 1882. He got passed up on a job because of this spoil system. And Congress decides, okay, it's time to act here. In 1883, Congress passes the Pendleton Act, and it creates the Civil Service Commission. This commission gives competitive exams and selects appointees on the basis of merit and not their political affiliation. So when this act first passes, only 10% of the federal civilian employees are part of the civil service. Now it's reversed. 90% are covered by the merit system. And you get better candidates and better people in those jobs because now you're hiring the most qualified person, not based on what political party they're affiliated with. In 1889, Theodore Roosevelt becomes the U.S. Civil Service Commissioner. So he kind of oversees this, and he wanted reform in the civil service system. He wanted to attract the best people. He believed that it should be on merit whether you get a government job, not your party views. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you listening, and y'all have a wonderful day.